Stay tuned for Butler on Business, coming up next on the Liberty Express.
Welcome back. I'm Alan Butler. My co-host is Jason Riddle.
And now joining us on the phone to talk about some of the parallels between the student loan debt crisis and what we saw with the housing bubble and the mortgage crisis is the research fellow at the Markakis Center at George Mason University, Antony Davies. Welcome back to the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Anthony, it's good to have you back, buddy.
Thank you.
Now, it's obvious to almost anybody paying attention that with $1 trillion out there of student debt, well, we've got another crisis coming.
Yes, yeah, and there are tremendous parallels between this crisis and what we had with the housing market. In both cases, the federal government kept interest rates at historically low levels, which encourages people to borrow. And then it gave preferential tax treatment to the thing, and then it directs the government agencies to effectively take over the loan markets, pushing loans out into the market that the market didn't want to be there in the first place. And what you get with student loans is what we had with housing, is overborrowing.
Well, I think a lot of people understand that Fannie and Freddie were there subsidizing a lot of the housing loans. They were encouraging a lot of the ill-advised lending that was taking place. How has the government been involved in the student loan industry to help incentivize the increase in student loans?
Well, this is something that's frequently overlooked of all things in the language of the law of the Affordable Health Care Act. So Obamacare, there was language there that called for the Department of Education to start giving loans directly to students who are looking to borrow. So the government used to do this in a smaller way with Sallie Mae, and then Sallie Mae became more privatized. But now it's moving back into this market. And the last estimate I saw is the government's responsible for about 60% of the student loans out there.
Anthony, I mean, this has turned into a big voting block. I wonder, since they tucked student loans into Obamacare, if that wasn't the game plan all along. They're trying to expand their voting block.
Quite possibly so. It doesn't make any rational sense. Because, look, one of two things is true. Either a college education is valuable or it isn't. If it is valuable, there's no need to subsidize it because the thing has value and that'll pay off. If it isn't value, we have no business subsidizing the thing. So either way, the government's got no business being in this market.
Well, Anthony, how would you respond to the folks who say that college is very important and these types of subsidized loans help people go to college that might not otherwise have the opportunity to go to college?
Yeah, and that kind of a statement reveals a contradiction. If college really is valuable, then the market will reward that with a higher salary that more than compensates for the cost of the thing. So we can't say in the same sentence that college is valuable, but you can't earn enough in the marketplace to pay for it. That's contradictory.
Is there any correlation, do you think, between the subsidized student loans or the increase in subsidized federal student loans and the increase in tuition prices? It seems that college is just becoming more and more expensive these days.
Very much so, there's a link there, and it's the same kind of link we saw in housing. When the government pushed mortgages out into the market, more mortgages than the market would have generated otherwise, it encouraged people to buy houses who wouldn't be buying houses otherwise, and that drives up the price of housing. You get the same thing with the student loan market. You push loans out there that the market would not have generated on its own, so you get people going to college who wouldn't have gone otherwise. That increases the demand for higher education. The price of higher education goes up.
All of us know, though, that these colleges, they continue to erect new buildings. They're just still on an expansion tear. They are, and a lot of that comes from the fact that today's student expects a college environment to be effectively a four-star hotel. And this stuff isn't cheap. You know, if you want air conditioning, internet access, and gyms and all of this stuff, which students are demanding, you got to pay for it.
Well, how does this crisis come to a head? Obviously, with the real estate market, when we realized there weren't enough real resources to complete a lot of the projects, when the asset prices started coming down, things started to unwind. Where does it end? What's the end game here for the college loan bubble?
That's a darn good question. The end game is worse, and here's why. When I get into a house that I can't afford, I can declare bankruptcy. And in declaring bankruptcy, it wipes out the debt, and part of my debt can be paid off because I've got this house. It's worth something, right? So I can sell it. It pays off part of the loan that I owe. And with the bankruptcy, I've got a do-over. Now, with the student loan debt can't be discharged through bankruptcy. So you can declare bankruptcy and the student loan debt remains. More than that, you've got no asset. I can't turn around and sell my education back to pay off the debt. So this crisis, this bubble bursting is going to be worse than the housing bubble.
Well, with the federal government so involved in this industry now, is there a risk that the taxpayer might get stuck with the bill?
Oh, that's exactly who it is. The rhetoric you hear from Washington is the government is going to pay for the education. The government's going to do this. It's not the government. The government has no money unto itself. The money it spends comes from the taxpayer. So when we talk about, forgiving student loans, it sounds magnanimous. It's not the taxpayer's money.
Where do you think this thing head? Where does it end?
Well, I think where it ends is we'll get a bubble and a burst, and people wake up with a hangover like we did with the housing market and realize that this was a bad idea. And unfortunately, the job of economists anymore is to say, I told you so, because nobody listens to them beforehand. You have to wait for the bubble to burst, and then the economists will point back and say, look, I told you this 3 years ago.
Don't you think, though, both political parties, since those with student loans are becoming a larger and larger percentage of the population, and they're so fond of this inflation tax of theirs, and they don't think we're on to the inflation tax, that the path of least resistance is going to be some sort of forgiveness or forbearance on these student loans?
I don't know. The thing we need to be careful of here is we talk about forgiving the student loans, and the student loans are not all the same. The average college degree today is worth about $600,000, and that's after you subtract out the cost of tuition, right? So you're $600,000 better off on average with a college degree. But that varies widely. You get someone with an engineering degree, economics degree, that's worth over $1 million. But you get something like social work or elementary education, that's only worth $100,000. So if you want to talk about forgiving student loans, there's no point in forgiving the engineers and the economists and the mathematicians. Their degrees are going to pay off.
So what you're saying is I know you don't, but if we carry that argument on through, then the only loans that would be forgiven are the liberal arts degrees?
Well, effectively that, and then you get into a weird space where you're rewarding people for taking degrees in areas that the marketplace does not put a premium on.
Well, then I think that we have to look back, whether it's the housing crisis or whether it's the student loan crisis, and ask why across the board do people tend to make the same mistake of engaging in these irrational behaviors that don't pay off in the long run.
Yeah, and if we're talking about the politicians, the problem here is that people have this tendency to believe that government is a magic wand. So you wave it and simply say, well, we should have more education, we should have more housing. Nothing comes at zero cost. So what the politicians don't tell you is, well, we'll give you more education, but it's going to cost you in the following way. If they said that, I think the electorate would be far more hesitant to vote in politicians who pull stuff like this.
Antony, it's been a pleasure, buddy.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It's been a pleasure to have you.